today we're going to be talking about creation, right? So there's all different ways which people view creation, and I'm not just talking about what we believe in when we talk about creation. I'm talking about also nature itself and how that is creation. And so we're going to be going over a whole bunch of different theories which people have and reasons why they're wrong. Now, we don't have time to dive very deeply into any of these, so we're going to cover just the surface on all of them. But for those of you in my biology class, or not biology class, I don't teach biology. For those of you in my worldview class, you had the biology lecture, and we talked about some of these same things. So I hope you studied up because you should know lots about this, okay? So, if you notice at the top of the board, we have kind of like a scale. It looks like a number line, but it has different increments which are marked out by different theories. Okay? Each of these theories are different bridges, is what I call them, that bridge the gap between the two endpoints, which are creationism and atheism. So who knows what creationism is? Anybody have? Go ahead.
That everything is designed and created by God.
Yeah, it's a little bit more specific than that even. Creationism goes into, it's exactly how God said it happened in the Bible, in the book, in Genesis 1 and 2. Those are the first two chapters of the Bible, right? And it explains how creation came about. And so creationism believes that that's exactly how it happened. God said it, it came into being. He molded man in the way he claimed he did, and it happened over the course of how many days?
6.
6 days of creation, and what did he do on the 7th, which created a week?
Rested.
He rested, right? Yeah, so God created the week. God created it. It happened about how many years ago? Give or take. How long have we calculated it to? Approximately 6,000. Some people calculate it a little less. Some people calculate it a little more, but it's approximately 6,000 because we can't know exactly. We're not God, and that's the big thing which people forget. We weren't there at creation. No one was there, only God was. And so because even the very first human wasn't even there till the last day of creation, we can't go back and scientifically prove anything about the origin of the universe because there's nothing, no one was there. No one can replicate it. Nobody can go see it again. We don't have time machines to go watch God speak it into being, right? Okay? So creationism is really important. It's what we believe, right? But then there's something else. When God's talking about creation, he says, and there was what? Evening and morning, the first day. He always addresses it with both evening and morning. That gives the sense of a literal 24-hour day. But then we can go even deeper into creationism and we can say, what does the word, the Hebrew word, which they're using when it says the first day, the second day, the third day, what is that Hebrew word they're using for day? Well, the word is yom, okay? It looks like this. Y-O-M. Not in Hebrew, sorry. I didn't get it translated this time. But in English, it looks like that. And if you've ever heard the saying, a yom is a yom is a yom, it's meaning a day is a day is a day. It's talking about how there's no difference between this word. It's talking about a 24-hour day. It's not talking about a time period. It's talking about a singular day. That word literally means a 24-hour cycle of the earth rotating. Okay? And so that Hebrew word, it's talking about a 24-hour day. All right? So that's one of the important things which I want you guys to remember as we go through the other theories, which we're going to talk about. The second theory on this list is the gap theory. This one sticks the closest to the original story in Genesis, so I put it closest to creationism. But it has its own little quirk. They want to account for millions and billions of years in the gap theory, so they say there's a pause between the very first verse of Genesis and the second verse of Genesis where millions and billions of years happen. So they read the Bible like this. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Millions and billions of years. And the earth was formless and void, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the surface of the waters. Oh, wait. And God was hovering over the surface of the waters, and the Spirit of the Lord was hovering over the surface of the deep. Sorry, got it backwards. But do you understand? They added in that millions and billions of years. But then everything else happened exactly how the Bible said. Now this group of people, I've met 3 of them in my life. One of them was a school professor. One of them was someone at my church when I was younger. And one of them was a pastor at another church, which I attended when I was younger. These people are a dying breed. They are, because there's literally no evidence for this. There's no biblical evidence for it. The Bible never once says there was a gap of time in between here where all kinds of stuff happened. There's nothing that supports it. There's no scientific evidence, because according to scientific models, which are not real science because you can't actually test anything about the origin of the universe because you can't go back and see it or replicate it, there's nothing that supports this, okay? And actually, 2 of those 3 people have died already. So I call them a dying breed. But yeah, nobody believes it nowadays. There's nothing that supports it at all. Next, we have the day-age view, okay? This is that each day of creation was a large period of time, an eon. And who knows what an eon is? Nobody? More than thousands, sometimes it's millions. It's actually not a specifically described number. An eon's just a large period of time. Typically above thousands, normally close to millions. It's the increments which scientists use for evolution to define age. They say it's an eon. And that means they don't have to put a specific number on it, but it's just a really large amount of time. Okay? So they make these days into an age, into an eon. And this eon is then where evolution or creation takes place. It could be that God just had to sit there and make every single chicken individually. And so it took him an eon to make every chicken, sparrow, and hawk. Okay? And so that's why it took so long. Or evolution happened in those eons, in those ages. Now, it happened in the order God said it did, but it still was evolution happening in those ages, right? Which are the days. Now, where they get their evidence for this scripturally is actually 2 Peter 3, verse 8. Trust me, I'm going to undermine it in just a minute. Levi, please, 2 Peter 3, verse 8.
But do not let this one fact escape your notice, beloved, that with the Lord 1 day is like 1,000 years, and 1,000 years like 1 day.
Okay, that's the whole verse, Levi. But don't worry, we're going to read more of that section in just a minute, okay? They say a day is as 1,000 years to the Lord, and 1,000 years is as a day. That's where they get their scriptural foundation for this verse. And they grab their scientific evidence from science that supposedly supports evolution and atheism, okay? But their scriptural foundation is very weak. Why is that? Does anybody know? Anybody? They took it out of context. They took that verse out of context. So, Levi, would you mind reading from verse 1 in 2 Peter 3 to verse 9, please?
Oh, hold on. I need to go back.
Oops,
Okay,
sorry.
Verse 1. This is now, beloved, the second later I am waiting to you, in which I am stirring up your sincere mind by stirring up your sincere mind by way of remember that you should remember these words spoken beforehand by the holy prophet and the commandment of the Lord and Savior spoken by the apostle. Now Know this first of all, that in the last day, mockers will come with their mocking, following after their own lusts, and saying, where is the promise of his coming? Forever since the fathers fell asleep, all continues just as it was from the beginning of creation, for when the mountain mention this, it escapes their notice that by the word of God the heavens existed long ago, and the earth was formed out of water and by water, through which the world at that time was destroyed, being flooded with water. But by his word, the present heavens and earth are being resolved reserved for fire. Keep for the day of judgment and destruction and ungodly men. But do not let this one fact escape your notice, beloved, that you and the Lord one day it is like 1,000 years, and 1,000 years like one day.
To verse 9.
Okay. The Lord is not slow about his promise, as some count slowness, but it is patient toward you, not wishing for any to perish, but for all to come to repentance.
Okay, so thank you, Levi, for reading that for us. But that passage, if we notice, it's not talking about creation specifically. It does bring up some of the parts of creation. It's talking about the day of the Lord, which is when what happens? When Christ returns, right? And it's talking about how God is not slow in bringing his wrath upon us. It's a context piece. When you think about it in the day of the Lord, it's saying that God is being patient for us. God is waiting for us. And his waiting is not a time where he's sitting there like tapping his foot. It's taking forever. For him, he's outside of time. Time doesn't have anything to do with him. He is the creator of time. So he can be a part of time when he needs to be a part of time, but he can also dwell outside of it because that is where he is. He's not guided by that. So he does not have to deal with 1,000 years or a day. It lasts the same amount of time for him because he doesn't have time. Okay? And so that verse, when it's talking about a day is as 1,000 years and 1,000 years is as a day, it's not even the same word because it's a totally different language. But not only that, it's also not the same context. The context is the Lord's patience in waiting for us to come to repentance in him, not the context of creation and how long it took him to make it. Okay? All right. The next one is progressive creationism. Progressive creationism has got the word creationism in it. Woohoo! This one is that as the stages reached their point in evolution, where they were supposed to change from one animal to the next animal, God stepped in and made that animal quick, and then let evolution happen. And then it was like, okay, it's time to change to the next animal, made that animal quick, and stepped out and let it go, and stepped in and made the animal quick. Kind of silly, right? Okay? But one thing is, it does leave it in a millions and billions of years time frame because they leave that gap of time of where the animal is supposed to be evolving and whatever else, which doesn't make any sense to me why that would be happening. But eventually, you get to a point where you have to go, okay, there's no biblical foundation for this. Because, as we said before, a yom is a yom is a yom. It's a day. There's no question about what it means. It's talking about evening and morning, one day. And so we can go back to that. But also, that would skip intermediaries in the evolutionary cycle. That's true, which there's no evidence for any intermediate components to evolution. So that makes sense why they would choose this. But why would we skip following what God's word says if there's no evidence for what you're trying to fit into the picture of it? It doesn't make any sense to do that. And then we have the next one, the framework hypothesis. Now, some of you guys may remember talking about this a little bit because 3 years ago we actually had a debate at the school on this theory. Exactly, specifically actually. But all of the high schoolers who were in that debate have now graduated. So none of our high schoolers will remember the information on it too well probably because they were in middle school, but maybe they do. But the framework hypothesis, on a very general level, my students last time went very deep with it, which I'm very proud of them for, but on a very general level, it takes a poetic view. It keeps the framework of creation, but it says the first 2 chapters of Genesis were just poetry, okay? And so it doesn't exactly follow what the book says. That was just a little poem to get the book started and just talk about how things could have been creative or maybe whatever, okay? But the fact about the framework hypothesis is that why would the book start as a pretty little poem if the entire rest of it is literal history? Okay? They try to take every other chapter of Genesis and say, it's a history book, it's telling exactly what happened, this is what we know about the past, about Exodus and about Abraham and Isaac and Jacob and everybody else, okay? But we're going to take those first 2 chapters and we're going to say they're a poem. That's ridiculous. Books in the Bible specifically, there are times where some of them will use poetry, but it's very evident when they switch into poetry. There's no change between the way it's written. It's written in the same form, in the same way. It doesn't even have the reflective poetry. Actually, there is a little bit of a reflective poetry in it, how it was created. But that's only because our God is an artist, and he can do things which look like reflective poetry in his actual physical work, okay? But there's no other reason why you could possibly conclude that it's poetry when the whole rest of the book is literal history, okay? The last one before atheism is theistic evolution. This one's the closest to evolution because what they did is they took the theory of evolution and they were like, how can we cram God into this picture? How can they cram God into this picture? Have him set off the dominoes. He sets up everything so that evolution will happen exactly like it's supposed to, and knocks down the first domino and just steps back and watches it happen. Exactly how science says. Levi, this is your verse. Genesis 2 verse 7, or no, not Levi, this is Rome. Sorry, she called Levi, so it got me confused. Rome, this is your verse, Genesis 2 verse 7.
Then the Lord God formed the man from the dust of the ground and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and the man became a living creature.
Okay, from a biblical worldview, that's a huge no-go. We cannot have evolution because, for one thing, evolution's, it's the highest evolved creature, but it's no different from the ape, except for it has just something else that it gained through evolution, okay? From the biblical worldview, God created man special. He created him different. He molded him from the dust of the earth and breathed the breath of life into his lungs. He did what? He created him in what?
His image.
His image. Yeah. He created mankind in his image. That sets him apart. And then he didn't just say, okay, you look like me, you have my breath of life in you, and I molded you special, but that's it. He then put them over everything in the earth, put him to rule over the earth and all the creatures in it. Okay? So mankind was set apart special. If you just have evolution, we're nothing but cells which got together and gained a consciousness somehow. Wow. Okay? There's nothing special about mankind. So that's why theistic evolution is really a bad theory from a biblical worldview. Okay? And then atheism. Who knows what atheism believes? I see a hand. Yep.
It reads about Big Bang sometimes, and also that there is no God.
No God. Big Bang. Yep. And then they believe in evolution, right? And what is evolution? Evolving. But it also starts with somehow the chemicals got right in this pool of lava, and it created a single cell. And then the lava somehow turned to water. We're not quite sure how that happened. And then it evolved into a multi-celled creature. And then it evolved into complex creatures. And then the fish crawled out of the sea and went on to dry land. And then it became a cow. And then it went back into the sea as a dolphin. And then it came back out. There's a crazy story. I'm sorry. I've watched way too many videos on how it works. Then the cow also, like, its neck grew long and it became a giraffe. And everything just evolved into what it was. All right? Now, here's the biggest, well, there are lots of big problems with that, even from a scientific point of view. For one, there's no intermediary species. And if you had a cow growing into a giraffe or whatever it is, you would have to have some animal in between which had a longer neck than a cow and a shorter neck than a giraffe, because they don't just all of a sudden get all the bones which it takes to have that long of a neck, right? You don't just magically in 2 seconds have that. So they look for them and they find things like Archaeopteryx, and they're like, oh, that's the transition between a bird and a dinosaur. But all the evidence points to Archaeopteryx is just a bird which is extinct now. There's nothing really that shows it's a dinosaur. It has bones which are porous. It has feathers. It has a serrated beak, which, by the way, that was one of the big hang-ups for people. But there are ducks which are still alive today which have serrated beaks. So, it's not completely out. Yes, you had a question.
I was just gonna say, just a comment, so typically if you look at atheistic view of evolution, it's going from chaos or disorganization to highly organized. And the opposite is true for creationism, which is highly organized going into disorder. And
Yep.
if you look around creation, we are in a state of, it's a gradual change into disorder.
That's my next point, actually.
Oh, sorry.
It's okay. Honestly, it's a really good point that you brought up, especially that perspective, because I was going to take a different perspective of it and mention that another reason why evolution is not a good argument is because there's order in the world. And you can't get order from chaos. You can't get order from nothing. There's no source also for evolution. And you can't have something without a source. We see in everything that we look around us, there is a source, a beginning to everything, something that began it. The paintings don't make themselves. Paintings are not beautiful when they are not thought through, right? They're just chaos, and chaos isn't art, really. Now, some people will try to argue with you that it is, but actually I just read a theory about that, and it was really cool because it was talking about how as we deteriorate with sin, our art, our theater, our everything deteriorates with us. And so art has gotten worse as the culture has gotten worse. It's very interesting. Okay, well, we're going to have to do this next part next week. So we are out of time, but yes.
I'll say this really quick, so the other side of that is atheism, there's a view of that man is inherently good, and from a creationist perspective, we are, the only good we have is because of Christ or God.
Yes.
And so we are inherently bad, but
Mhm.
only through him can be good.
Yeah, thank you. All right,
And there's no evidence because the fossil records.
we brought up the fossil records.